Good morning again. Thank you for joining us for this third day of the Deliberative Democracy Days. We will start with a discussion panel on gender equality, inclusion, and deliberative democracy. My colleague Olivia will be moderating the session. Olivia, you have the floor.
Hello? Yes, you can hear me. Great. So good. Blinking.
Can you please improve?
Hi. Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. This session will be about gender equality, inclusion, and deliberative democracy. We will have a look on how deliberative democracy can serve gender equality and inclusion, and also vice versa. We have with us three great speakers today. We have on my right Joana Maycock. She is a European women rights campaigner, and she co-founded Women 100, a community of diverse women in Brussels. Uh, then we have Sana Afouaiz. She's an award-winning gender expert, woman advocate, and public speaker. And she co-founded or founded and is CEO of Womenpreneur. And then we have Rumbidzai Kandawasvika-Nhundu, sorry. She is a gender equality advocate and democracy advocate and practitioner. She is currently senior advisor for democracy and inclusion at International IDEA. I will give you the floor to be our first speaker.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. She tried my name, but I'm sure it's also part of celebrating the diversity that we have across the world. So thank you for the trial. I'm Rumbidzai Kandawasvika-Nhundu, and I'm the senior advisor at International IDEA. International IDEA is the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, with our headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden. But we have programs in different parts of the world. So we have a regional office that covers Asia and the Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa and North Asia, and we also have a regional program for Europe. And at International IDEA, just to give a context, our mandate is to support democracy worldwide. And by doing that, we engage mostly on electoral processes, constitution building processes, political participation and representation, and the quality or the state of democracy at, worldwide. And in doing that, we produce a flagship publication called The Global State of Democracy. Maybe a number of you have come aware of it. In that work, we place a fundamental emphasis on gender equality and inclusion, precisely because the world is constituted of people who are diverse, and because of that, democracy has to be representing what we see in terms of the demographic profiles. I want to emphasize the key features of deliberative democracy. And if indeed the premise is that deliberative democracy is about deliberation and representativeness, we then need to start saying to ourselves, to what extent can it serve or be a conduit for achieving gender equality and inclusion in democracy building? And I want to put forward a conceptual way and conceptual framework, which I believe we need to pay particular attention to as we engage and we move forward with ensuring that deliberative democracy becomes a conduit for gender equality and inclusion. It's the conceptual framework on issues of access, how deliberative democracy can be a conduit for access. It's the conceptual framework on participation and representation. And I will explain why I'm saying participation and representation, because participation is one thing, representation is another, because you can participate, but you might not end up having a voice or influence. And the other part is transformation. So as international idea, we look at democracy building processes and institutions. And you hear me emphasizing the point about processes as well and institutions, because the election in itself, electoral democracy, is not tantamount to democracy. We can have elections. We've been having elections in different parts of the world, and I can speak definitely in relation to the continent where I come from. We can have processes, we can have elections happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because elections are taking place, we have attained democracy. And in that context, we always see, for instance, the efforts for election observations. And I am sitting here because I've interacted a lot with a number of European delegations observing elections. And to some extent, I'm like, I think we have turned electoral processes to be more about election tourism. We fly in and fly out and declare that elections were free and fair. Free and fair, but we're not even going into the details in terms of, for instance, the inclusion and the participation, meaningful inclusion and participation and representation of different segments of the populations. So if we look at inclusive, if we look at deliberative democracy and the difference that it can make from an access, participation and representation and transformation conceptual approach, first and foremost, we need to interrogate and challenge the different democratic processes that I've given, for example, even how political parties are formed and established, what is pertaining in relation to the legal frameworks or legislative frameworks that establish political parties. To what extent do we have inclusive and enabling provisions within the national laws for political parties? Inclusion in the fact that political parties are required right from the formation to ensure that they include women, men, boys, and girls in all their diversity, without, with no regard to any identity that they carry. To what extent do we have those enabling provisions in political party? And we can then also look at the issues around electoral processes. We have several electoral management bodies. I'm sure when I say electoral management bodies, you understand it's the commissions. They can be called commissions that administer and manage electoral processes in different countries. When we are looking at the issues around electoral processes from a gender equality and inclusion perspective as conduits for building democracy, we need also to be unpacking what is pertaining in relation to the electoral laws in the different countries. What happens when it comes to voter registration processes? What happens with regards to the civic and voter education awareness, information dissemination? To what extent is that information packaged in such a way that it can reach women, men, boys, and girls in all their diversity? To what extent does it ensure that even if people are from minority backgrounds, they have access to this information and they can be able to participate in the different electoral processes? Because elections, they can just happen on one day, but what happens in terms of the processes building up to the elections themselves, that is very fundamental with ensuring that gender equality and inclusion is attained in democracy building. The other aspect that we also need to consider with regards to the access pillar, it's not just the legal framework, it's also the social, cultural attitudes. Because this is the gamut that I say is very problematic, because the reason why we see a lot of exclusion and inequalities and discrimination, all forms of discrimination, it's not essentially because the laws are there. In fact, in a number of countries, the laws are very enabling, but the social, cultural attitudes, rigid gender norms and perceptions, and the stereotypes and perspectives, those are the ones that become barriers for attaining gender equality and inclusion in democracy building. And some of the rigid gender norms pertain to the notions that because you are born male or female, according now to your biological definition, or in non-binary, you are supposed to do A, B, C, D. And in that regard, you already see the socialization that creates the barriers and hindrances that are working against attaining gender equality and meaningful inclusion in democracy. Not only do we see the social cultural norms and practices and rigid gender roles being a barrier, but also even the role of the media. To what extent can the media be a conduit for gender equality and inclusion in democracy? Those are some of the issues that we need to bring to the fore in terms of our deliberative democracy efforts. How can the media be a vehicle for creating and facilitating gender equality and inclusion in democracy building processes? And like I said from the onset, as international idea, we look at democracy building processes not just in relation to the election. We look at what's happening in political parties. And in that regard, it can also, we need to reflect in a very critical way from a deliberative democracy aspect, what happens in terms of the intra-party democracy processes around the issues on the election, on the nomination, selection, and identification of candidates. What happens? Is that done from a gender equality and inclusion perspective? So if we are going to be moving forward with and harnessing the benefits of deliberative democracy, we need to look at the different interconnected aspects for democracy building. It cannot just be the legal framework. We need to look at the social, cultural practices, and more, we need to pay particular attention even to the educational systems and curriculums that are in the different countries. What messaging, what role models are contained in the educational curriculum, because that's also a very key or a very strong building block in terms of what we'll see. Does it empower boys and girls in all their diversity to be able to engage in different forums? Because that's what deliberative democracy is all about, isn't it? I mentioned the key features of deliberation and representativeness. So even if we have different views and perceptions, can we learn to be able to differ but not be enemies? Because it's a very important feature for deliberative democracy. Can we learn to be tolerant of the different political views and ideologies, but without being enemies of each other? And I think if those key features of deliberation and representativeness are really promoted across the world, it might take us somewhere in terms of ending the conflicts that we are seeing across the world. And when we work and push for democracy building from that perspective, it will also help us to realize that elections actually and electoral processes should not just be about winning an election. They should be about representation. But we have turned elections to be about winning. And we have commercialized elections so that the one who is rich and the one who is the loudest is the one who triumphs over all. It becomes very competitive. And I also have to point out that as a result, to a very large extent, I strongly believe that our notions of democracy, in good as they are, but they are also very steeped in patriarchal mindsets, the patriarchal dominating way of doing politics, to such an extent that when even we are speaking from a gender equality perspective, that both women and men should be in these spaces and having a voice and influence, the first narrative or the main narrative that is pushed forward is like, oh, are women competent? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the merit? But we never get to question the competence and merit in relation to men. when they are participating in positions of power and decision making that are conducive for democracy building. So at the end of the day, there's a lot that we need to unpack if indeed deliberative democracy is going to be a reality, because there are many factors and aspects that are very challenging and we need to interrogate them. So that's the aspect of in terms of the access. How do we get both women and men, boys and girls, in all their diversity to be in the democratic spaces? Then there is the issue of participation and representation. As I said at the onset, participation is one thing and representation is another, because you can participate in terms of what I call the politics of presence, that physically you are there. But in terms of voice and influence, you are very minimalized or you are marginalized. So how do we ensure that deliberative democracy allows participation and representation? So the politics of the presence, the physical presence, is then translated into voice and influence in terms of public decision making, the deliberation on options and policies, and all the interventions that needs to be taken. Then the last aspect that I need to highlight under the access, participation, and representation and transformation conceptual approach on deliberative democracy is the aspect of transformation. If everything that we do cannot transform mindsets, cannot transform the conditions, the status and quality of lives of peoples in all their diversity, then we still have a problem with whatever we are calling democracy. So we need to see that deliberative democracy becomes a conduit for transformative change, and transformative change should ultimately ensure gender equality and inclusion in democracy building. I just want to end by highlighting one of the most recent statistics and knowledge-based information that has just been published by UN Women and the UN Statistics Division. And I'm saying this in the backdrop of just coming from the UN Commission on the Status of Women. It's still running, but I was attending the session in the past week. One of the maybe concerning and information that has just been published by UN Women is that it will take us close to 300 years, at least they say about 286 years, to eliminate discriminatory laws and practices in order to attain gender equality. Because when we attain gender equality, ultimately it translates into meaningful inclusion in democracy. So this is knowledge-based research information recently published, that it will take us 286 years to remove discriminatory laws and practices across the world. We are not even talking, these are just the formal laws. We have not even started with the gamut that I said it's problematic, social, cultural norms and practices, and some of them are intertwined with religious interpretations. We are just talking about the formal laws. It will take us 286 years. What does that mean for attaining meaningful deliberative democracy that can promote gender equality and inclusion? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. As I understand, Sana, you do work exactly on participation and representation of women. So I would like to give you the floor now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for highlighting very important factors and you gave an overview of the reality of things, how they are today. I would like to highlight that we are living in evolving societies, and democracy today is becoming a very fragile concept. when you look into what's happening in terms of the development that we are living today, our political leaders cannot sit down and actually put on a place a law to control Bitcoin, to control GDPR, to control all the new innovations that are basically part of our daily lives. So that's why it's very important that we have a round of a panel that is diverse to make sure that we put in place laws that represent and speak for everyone. I have a friend of mine. We challenge each other all the time. I'm not gonna say he's a feminist. He's questioning a lot feminism, and that's okay. I mean, we don't want everyone to kind of just be part of feminism just for the sake of being a feminist. I actually think it's very good to have these uncomfortable discussions, to kind of sit with someone who has opposed ideas and actually discuss, because that's our society. We are products of society, and we have, views, because we come from different backgrounds, we see life differently, so we see life through our lenses. So every time we talk about different subjects, from gender, politics, science, business, and he always has something to question about women. And then we've been discussing about politics, and then he told me, like, I feel like women are not competent to be in politics for different reasons. And I said, like, okay, tell me why. He said, like, just politics, it's all about competition once again, and women are not into competitive spaces. And when Liz Truss resigned, he immediately sent me a message saying, see, I told you. And then I received a message from him when Jakanda decided also to resign. What's interesting is that when these two female figures decided to resign for completely different reasons, um, the media was kind of highlighting what society thinks of women in politics, that women are not competent to be in politics. But let's remind everyone that actually women have been given the right to be in politics 60 or 70 years ago. I mean, in Belgium, it has been only 60 years ago that women were allowed to even open a bank account. In Switzerland, women were allowed to vote only in the 70s. So women haven't been given, the space to actually give and show that there are different diverse way of, doing politics. And I think that's what is needed today in politics. Is we've seen that during COVID crisis, we've been looking into politicians who are more empathetic, more into human values. We kind of, for a moment, we were kind of being very questionable on how our leaders have been dealing with this crisis. And I think at that moment we realized that the best leaders who actually dealt with crisis, the crisis of COVID in quite amazing way was Jakanda, for instance. So I think, unfortunately, politics have been for so long dominated by one narrative, by one style, that we think that that's politics. And that's why representation, inclusion is important. But also what's important is sustainability, is accountability. And that reminds me of Simone de Beauvoir when she said, women's rights are always kind of, they're never required. We have always to fight for them. In times of crisis, on political level, economic level, religiously, and other type of levels, we always kind of tend to lose women's rights, and we have always to question, to have always to fight for them. They're never acquired. We have always to fight for that. Look at the example of the US. It's a democratic country. It's one of, most developed countries in the world. Yet 25 Republicans decided that women should not have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies, and basically don't have the right to abort. When 25 men decide for you as a woman what to do with your own body in a democratic country, imagine what's happening somewhere else where democracy is not an institution established within the norms. So indeed, there is a lot of to do, and it's not, we have a long road as women, but also others, not only women concerned, to do in order to be in this space. There is so much support that needs to be given to women who are in politics. It's already very difficult to have a space there. So to kind of, have lack of support would only diminish the level or the number of women that are in politics. And also in terms of in Europe, I mean, we thought that quotas will be the solution to have more women in politics. Belgium introduced the law of quotas in 2022. Nevertheless, today we only have one co-president of a political party. The government of Belgium, as it is today, is the first one in the history of Belgium to have a certain level of parity in the government. So quota was there since 2002. Yet, we have very few women who are in the top positions in the political parties. So the question is not only about quota, it's about the mindset that we are installing in our society. I really believe that if you want to kill the evil, you should look into its roots instead of just like looking into its branches. And I think there is so much spaces of training, of support that should be given to women. Political incubation could be, a good start. Providing women with, specific training, supporting and training women from an early age as well. And that's exactly what we did at Womenpreneur. We received an EU fund for our project that we presented, which is called Women in Action. It's basically 8-month program where we train women between 18 to 30 years old to basically play the role of a parliament, so a member. So we prepare them to kind of be a politician for one day. So during the 8 months, first we kind of focus on explaining and training them to understand their rights as women and as citizens in Belgium, and also to understand the rights as Europeans as well, understanding the different, the rules of different institutions here in Belgium, and also understand what are the rights in terms of any situation that they're facing. And then we worked on focusing on developing their skills in terms of leaderships, public speaking, meeting with other politicians, meeting with female politicians, and actually understand the daily life of a female politician. It's not easy, trust me. It's quite challenging. It requires a lot of thick skin. And then they put into the challenge of identifying a subject that they would defend at the parliament. So we've done the simulation on the 18th of February in the parliament here in Brussels, and each one of them selected a subject to defend. And it was an amazing exercise. And all of them for a moment believed that they are a member of a parliament. And we concluded the program by visiting the EU Parliament in Strasbourg and meeting with different female MEPs there. So what's interesting about this program is a lot of the participants joined different political parties. So we didn't, recommend any political party because we are very neutral. But what's interesting is that they took that basically action to go and seek a place in a political party. Others decided to create small groups in the universities discussing politics and women. So I think this program is not a solution, but it's part of the solution. It's creating that space. And I think this is type of efforts that we need to multiply to make sure that more women are in politics, more women know about politics, and to kind of, close that gap between women and politics. If you go to universities and then you talk to youngsters, you'll find more men who will be already active in politics from an early age. And there are very few women who are active. And even if you see, like here in Belgium specifically, the women who engage in politics, they engage in politics after 25 years old. So that comes after a certain experience, and because I managed to kind of get into different networking clubs or events, and then enters the political spheres. What if we prepare from an early age the youngsters into understanding that they have a role, they have a say in politics? When we went to Strasbourg and we kind of asked a lot of questions about the institutions, and we looked into how many MEPs are there. 70% of the MEPs are 45 plus. So there is lack of diversity at the EU Parliament today. That is a very important institution that is representing the democracy in Europe. So that means that there is a lot to do, on the European level. And I think that could start from also an individual level by saying, okay, what can I do today to make sure that everyone, not only women, is included in politics? Revolution starts, I really believe that starts from an individual level before we kind of, grow a collective action. So through my work, I have the opportunity to meet the women who are in politics. And then when you talk to them, they kind of, admit that there is a lot of effort that they have to do, double, triple efforts comparing to the male politicians. But also they are into that confusion of what is the style of leadership in politics that I should, show. Should I show that competitive, that violent, style, or should I be empathetic, kind of more reasonable, thinking of the collective, interest? Because politics, unfortunately, as you highlighted perfectly, it's about winning. It's about we are the best party. We are the party who has the solution. But I think today we live in evolving societies that we need to question and examine everything. What is the type of humanity we want to see 50 years from now? We live in societies that are today controlled or manipulated by technology on a daily basis. Technology is making our lives very easy. In China, sorry, we have the first CEO robot leading one of the biggest gaming company. Tomorrow we might have a robot politician deciding for us. Because today the power is no longer in the hands of a political elite. Today the power is in the hand of those who control data. Facebook today, Amazon, uh, Chat, ChatGPT today have more power than our leaders, president, prime ministers, whatsoever, because they can actually make you think something, make you believe something, make you buy something that you don't even need. So I think this is the moment for us to sit down and put our ego down, especially, and say, okay, what can we do to make sure that we don't lose our humanity 50 years from now? Because the challenges are big, but the opportunities are there as well, because behind every challenge, there is an opportunity. What will politicians do when they find out that in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will have a big part of the population that is young, but is going to be unemployed? Simply because they don't have the talent. The job market is changing so rapidly that we don't realize that in 20 years from now, we're going to face with a double challenge. Having young people who are full of, youthness, of richness, but we cannot actually hire them because simply they don't have the talent. And on the second level, we will have, especially here in Europe, a big population that is going to be old. How are we going to manage that? It's no longer about winning a political campaign. It's about sitting down and saying, okay, what can we do to make sure that our humanity is saved? And that will need collectiveness, diversity, inclusion, accountability, and sustainability. If we don't have this, we're going to lose it. So I think democracy, it's no longer about, making sure that one group is included. It's making sure that everyone is included, everyone is listened to, everyone is participating. And that's the challenge that especially our generation has. So that's what I would like to share.
Thank you so much. I found it interesting also you said about competition in politics, and I think deliberative democracy is also about that, just dialogue and talking and sharing and maybe overcoming that competition aspect of politics. And now I would like to give Joana the floor about, you were saying about how feminism can help deliberative democracy.
Thank you so much. And thanks to both of you for really thought-provoking and interesting insights and inputs. So I want to talk a bit about feminism and feminist leadership and how that can reinforce reflection and practice of deliberative democracy as well as traditional democracy processes. I've been living and working in this city, in Brussels, for 30 years. I've worked in campaigning for women's rights, gender equality, globally, in Europe, in different kind of civil society roles. So I've spent a lot of time also working with and lobbying women politicians and political parties, and trying to advance legislation and bring about legislation to support gender equality and women's rights in Europe across representation, seeking to also address and end violence against women and girls, and looking at economic injustice as well, and gender equality in the economic sphere, whether it's pay or care. So just to give you a sense of who I am and what I've been doing. And I'm particularly concerned about the practice of feminist leadership and how that can really help transform our democracies in a very positive way, and actually how we live our lives and how we imagine the world we want to build and live in 10 years, in 20 years from now. Perhaps the first thing I want to say is that feminism is not a battle of the sexes. This is not about men versus women. Feminism is about recognizing and dismantling patriarchal systems of power and domination that Rumbi already mentioned. Patriarchal systems operate pretty much in every part of the world, and they have been very, very sustainable, actually, for thousands and thousands of years. So it is quite a job of recognizing and transforming patriarchy. And I particularly want to reference perhaps and talk about power in relation to feminism and democracy and patriarchy, because the central thing about patriarchy is about the power over others, right? So it's about coercion and control of others. And we in feminism are interested in building a different kind of power in ourselves, power with others, and power too. So in patriarchy, power is seen as a finite resource, a zero-sum game. So if I have more, you have less. If you have more, I have less. So we have to fight over this finite resource of power. And as Anna was saying, that where that power lies and sits is very concentrated actually in our current systems, and not necessarily with those who we elect either. Feminism sees power as an infinite resource, something to build together and collectively. That we build power by recognizing and unleashing the power we have within ourselves and within others. That we build power with others, the collective power, and that gives us the power to do the stuff that we want to do together. So it's a really positive force. And the more we build, the more there is. So it's not a pie that we have to share out and I have more, you have less. It's a fabulous buffet that keeps replenishing as we all work together. And I think it's really important to say something about feminist perspectives on power, because often the word power itself, and I know it's different in different languages and there's different thinking, but it's often really seen as a very negative or toxic thing, especially by women or by those who are unrepresented in those power structures. So whereas it's not a battle of the sexes, what we have to recognize that within all our societies and within patriarchal systems, women are always second-class citizens. Always, everywhere in the world, including here, including in Sweden. We don't have any country in the world where women and men have equal rights. And that means that we have to take specific measures when we're thinking about power or democracy or deliberation to redress those inequalities, to understand those inequalities and to lift those barriers. Now, I'm an intersectional feminist, and that means that we also recognize there are other things which are at play, not just the sex or gender of a person, but also the other experiences or identities that they have, be it their class, their educational status, their ethnicity, their religion, their ability or disabilities, their sexuality. So there's many, many different things that come up into play here, and often compound. So it's not just one thing and another, but the two things or three things together actually make the discrimination and exclusion far, far worse. So we also recognize that women are not a minority. Women and girls are the majority of the population in the world, but women and girls are also very, very diverse. Right? This is not a uniform group by any means. So we have to recognize the intersectional nature of power and exclusion. So feminism, therefore, is not concerned about just getting a few more women into systems of power that are already excluding us and are already toxic in all the ways that Rumbi and Sana already mentioned. Women who are brave enough to step into those spaces face the most incredible discrimination all the way up through the political systems of party structures, elections, and the practice of power within institutions, be it city halls or European Parliament, that were, or party structures that were built by and for men in patriarchal structures, quite simply. And double and triple that if you are a woman of color, if you are a woman who's uses a wheelchair. You know, these are compounding the exclusion that you feel. So we really are interested in transforming the whole way that we think and deliberate and exercise power and even think about power. So we need to make one important point. We still think it's important to have more women in our current systems and structures, because we need that representation and we need those perspectives, and that needs to be diverse. And at the same time, we have to be thinking about, what are we building for the future? What are the systems of deliberation and discussion and democracy that we are building for the future as intersectional feminists? And so I've talked quite a lot about power, but the other 3 dimensions of feminist leadership I want to talk to you about are care, collaboration, and inclusion. So there's the 4 dimensions of feminist leadership in my thinking and view: is power, care, collaboration, and inclusion. I'll be brief on the others because I want to give you a couple of examples of things that are happening as well that may make this a bit more concrete. Care is a really central, important part of feminist thinking, analysis, and practice, and the demands of women in society. And recognizing that actually care for ourselves, care for others, and care for the planet should not be an afterthought, like, you know, an extra luxury that we add on to our societies once we've made profit and built stuff. But actually, care should be right at the heart of everything we do. If caring for children and older people and ourselves is not at the center of everything, then we're getting something very badly wrong. And I think we can all agree that we are getting things quite badly wrong. Care is also about how we behave towards each other, and it's a rejection of violence, a rejection of aggression, and a centering of care and being caring. Care is also really important when it comes to leadership and feminist leadership, because we have to recognize the additional work that women are doing, and it's mainly women caring for people within society, which often, because of the way our structures are made, acts as a barrier to women participating fully because of the lack of childcare or support for caring for elders, for example. So care is also a very central part of feminist leadership thinking. Then I come to inclusion. So I talked a little bit about this already. So it's not just about recognizing that people are excluded or discriminated, but that's the first step, is recognizing the intersectional ways in which discrimination and exclusion happen. But inclusion is about then seeking to understand the barriers that are in those people's way and actively seeking to lift those barriers. So that might mean, I was recently organizing an event in the Brussels Parliament, and before the event, actually going around and seeing the ways in which our sisters in wheelchairs would be able to access the different spaces, including the bathrooms, including the debate rooms, and recognizing that even in that parliament, that was not that straightforward and required a bit of effort. So inclusion is not just about the recognition, but it's about understanding why a woman with small children might not be able to participate, why a person who's hard of hearing might not be able to participate, why a person who has undocumented would be excluded from processes. And then the last part of feminist leadership is collaboration. So we've heard from both the previous speakers about the way in which our current political systems are built on competition. Really, this idea that there is not enough space for all of us. And I'm feeling now, I'm getting into my middle age, that things are getting even worse that the polarization of discussion and debate and the level of competition and violence in that competition it seems to be getting worse. And we see that played out a lot on social media, and particularly against women who dare to speak out, especially women who dare to speak out about women's rights, and especially women who are already excluded or discriminated in other ways. So we do not, that competition is going to get us nowhere in solving the big challenges that we're facing in the world right now. And we need to really embrace collaboration, not just as a nice idea, but invest in the tools and skills to help us, enable us collaborate with one another. And that means in our organizations, in our universities, in our parliaments, actually centering collaboration as something that we want to invest in and build the skills for. So these are two small examples I want to give you of the things that I've been involved in, because I think, so the first one is actually some reflection and discussion about deliberative democracy itself, which I know you've been discussing the last couple of days. So these new forms of innovation in democracy and citizens' participation and all the different ways in which this is kind of riding a wave at the moment, particularly around getting citizens involved in thorny, challenging issues like how to tackle climate change and how do we actually transition our economies to become greener, fairer, and more inclusive. And it occurred to me that if we were not very deliberate in reflecting from a feminist perspective about these new forms of democracy, what's going to happen is we're just going to repeat the same mistakes we've made. So on paper, the idea of deliberative democracy where you pull lots, at the very least means you get equal representation and you get more diversity. But that doesn't necessarily pan out in the way that the debates, the discussions are then formulated to include different voices. So I've been involved with a small discussion group. I think some of the other people in that group have been speaking here in the last couple of days, really trying to understand what would it look like to build deliberative processes with a feminist, intersectional feminist lens. So how would you do selection of people to participate? How would you even define the questions to ask and debate? And how would you facilitate the discussions to enable the collaboration, debates, and inclusion to happen? So that's one thing that's happening. And we've been working with Democracy Next. I think Yeva was here. She's not here again. Yeah, so they're working on manuals of how to build deliberative processes. So we've been helping them reflect on how to build an intersectional lens there. And then the very last one is more of a grassroots example, because I think democracy is not just about parliaments, it's about civil society, and it's about grassroots interaction and people talking to each other actually across barriers. And I love this city, and those of you who know it know that it's the most diverse city in Europe. It's actually the second most diverse city in the world after Dubai, but I think that means it's actually the most diverse city. It's a city which has people from all over the world in numbers, in all socioeconomic groups, in something like a third of the population is not Belgian, so it's super diverse. And yet we sit, like in all cities, in silos. And for some years, I've been like discussing with other women how we could build bridges across all the silos in Brussels through women. And so about 4 years ago, I'm thinking now, 4 years ago, we came together as a very diverse group of women to think about how we could build truly inclusive spaces for reflection and interaction amongst women in Brussels. And we built something that's called Women 100, W100, which is a network of women that love Brussels, that celebrate diversity in Brussels, and that come together in a spirit of curiosity and interaction. We have something like 200 women, I think, altogether in the network, and then obviously across social media, much more. And we build events from the beginning. The starting point is, how do we make this as inclusive as possible? And then we work from there, rather than let's do an event on a subject we want to talk about and then try and get people to come. So we build our events and our activities and our debates on the premise that we want people to interact with each other and to feel equal in that space. So yes, the provision of childcare, the provision of wheelchair accessible and disability accessible spaces. They're talking to different communities about what they want and what they need in a space before you build it. All these things mean that we build beautiful, joyful, inclusive, radically inclusive and diverse spaces to debate issues about the Brussels we want to build for tomorrow, that's safe for women, that's greener, and that's more inclusive. So there's just two very small examples I just wanted to share with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's so interesting. We already touched upon how democracy is about a deliberative democracy, it's about collaboration. And we also touched slightly upon, like in our youth panel, about inclusion. And now I find it interesting, like the idea of maybe how to bring care into deliberative democracy and how to empower women and everyone to actually participate equally and have equal influence in the deliberative democracy events. So now I would like to open the floor for questions. What time is it? Well,
Like 15, 17 minutes for questions.
okay, great. I would like to open the floor for questions.
So if you want to ask a question, let me know. I will bring you the mic. No? Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Miram. I'm wondering, especially another subject that I'm curious about, how do selected women serve women and women's problems? Anybody can answer.
Thank you. Maybe a second question before we go into responses? No? Okay, so let's start with this one.
Thank you for the question. If I understand correctly, it's how do elected women serve women's interests, serve or women's problems and solve women's problems. I think it's a very interesting question, but I also want us to maybe think of it the other way around. How do elected men serve and solve women's problems? Because, you know, with when you are in a representative, a leader, it's not essentially about, you know, women being elected into positions of power in decision making at all levels in order just to now expect women to be solving women specific problems. The whole notion of democracy and how it should be is that both women and men in all their diversity should be represented and all their problems solved. So we can also flip it the other way around and be asking, how are the elected men solving women's problems? Because when they are elected into positions of power and decision making, into leadership positions, they are not only elected by men, you know, in terms of the demographic profiles, they're elected by both women and men. So we should also expect the men who are elected as leaders to solve and serve women's problems. That's one part of it. And secondly, whilst I think there's a lot we need also to understand about, it connects to what Joana said about, you know, and what I call the politics of presence, that sometimes I'm saying we'll have, we need to have both women and men in those spaces in all their diversity, and then move forward with coming up with solutions and exploring solutions and alternatives in terms of what needs to be done to solve the problems of different segments of the populations in our societies. But at the same time, when we are electing or voting for women or making sure facilitating that women are represented in positions of power and decision making, I think the expectation should not be just to expect them to solve women's problems. Because already this is why you see, like, for instance, in parliament, women then are, ghettoized, if I can use that word, into committees for social welfare, for, voluntary work, for, the community work, the care work, which is unpaid, which is not remunerated and recognized even when we calculate our national GDP. So it's also about what we see. We would like to see women, because when women are solving trade issues, when women are solving international relations issues, are making decisions on that, they're actually solving women's problems and everybody's problem. So at the same time, I understand that there are some women-specific issues, but I would actually want to challenge the men who are in leadership. What are they doing to solve issues, for instance, pertaining to women's reproductive health rights? Access to sanitary wear in schools for girls in poor or disadvantaged communities. We need to have the men in leadership advocating and solving those issues, access to safe and clean drinking water, because we know probably in disadvantaged or poor communities, developing countries and developing democracies, young democracies, women spend more time walking long distances, fetching for water. And what are the men who are in the leadership, who are elected to be in representative bodies that are the entities and institutions for democracy building? What are they doing to solve those problems that affect women specific and women and young girls in all their diversity? And we connect it, for instance, with the issues of violence against women and girls. It should not just be we're expecting women who are elected to be the ones addressing and being responsible for solving such issues, as just as an example, violence against women in politics. Because at the end of the day, why is violence against women in politics, as an example, or violence against women in general, an issue? It's a manifestation of the patriarchal mindsets, the patriarchal systems and processes and socialization that we have, which connects to what Joanna was saying about exercising power over others rather than power with others and power within. So as we are engaged in deliberative democracy efforts, it brings us back also to our own perceptions or perspectives in terms of what we expect from leaders. One of the points that I want to reinforce is the very fact that you find that women are a minority in these spaces of making decisions, even though they represent a majority. But that representation aspect is in terms of not just then saying the entire responsibility for addressing discrimination, exclusion, inequalities in societies should just be the responsibility for women. It actually has to be the responsibility for both women and men in positions of power in decision making. So that's how I think we need to flip that question around as well, because it connects with the expectations. If you have 25 women in a parliament of 320, surely how do they even get to even influence the having an increased number of bathrooms? There was a point where there was a parliament which was never foreseen women coming in numbers. Maybe I think there were only 2 female toilets in that building. And then when there was some representation of at least 30%, the whole parliament building had to be renovated in order to accommodate these bodies that had come in the form of, being female. And we then don't expect that it's only that 30% that should make decisions concerning the conditions, the status, and the quality of life, or the concerns for women and girls in all their diversity. It should actually be the other way. That's the long story to my answer to your try and respond to your question. I hope it makes sense.
I will just add one thing. I'll make it short. Let's not forget that just because we have a woman in power doesn't mean necessarily that she's going actually to speak for women. Huh? Let's remember, Margaret Thatcher, when she was in politics, she only had one woman in her government. So I think we need to kind of also consider that a lot of women who are in politics, when they kind of, feel like this pressure of just talking about women issues, they feel like, okay, they're not considered as legitimate politicians. And I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, a woman politician is there to exercise her job representing the voices of the citizens before anything. And I think by doing that, she's opening the doors for other women. And I think what's important for a politician is to have always an inclusive agenda, making sure that the voices of everyone in a particular society are represented and are included. So I think that's very important, because what I see also in politics is that we associate a lot of soft positions to women. Everything related to equality of chances. Okay, we'll put a woman there. But it's very important that we put maybe people who we don't see usually in those positions, that maybe they can take the leadership on that or the responsibility of that. And that would maybe install a new mindset that is like more inclusive in society. I will give also an example of how important for us to understand the pressure that women politicians face on a daily basis when they exercise their work. In Tunisia, for instance, 2 years ago, there is this member of parliament, Abir Moussi. I don't know if you know about the story. She was slapped by her male colleague at the parliament because just she was against one of the proposition of that specific colleague, who basically he comes from a political party that is close to Ennahda, which is an Islamist party, and she is a feminist. And basically, she always makes sure that she voices that, and she reminds the opposition that Tunisia is a champion of equality in the Arab world. Her colleague just felt like he had the right to go and slap her in the face, just because she had a completely opposed idea. So this is the type of pressure that women politicians face on a daily basis. They have this huge responsibility of representing women, but I think they do that just by being there in spaces that are very much close to women.
Thank you. I really agree with what both of you said. It's almost because I'm concerned with how we actually transform the discussion and the narrative about what matters and what's important. And I think not all women who are elected into politics are feminist. Not all men are against feminism either. But I think we need to reimagine what matters in our societies and put different emphases back in play. And I think this is where women can make a difference if they're there in number and they know what they're doing. Because as I said, I think we need to put care back at the center. So building a society that is caring, that is green, that is inclusive, these are not soft things. These are going to save humanity and save the planet, right? And we need new ways of thinking that and putting renewed emphasis on that. So really flipping the story somehow about what matters, rather than you women, you can go and sit over there and talk about care. This should be the hard stuff in the center that we're talking about. How do we resolve looking after an aging society, raising new generations, learning about building greener, more inclusive cities and societies, and putting that into practice. So I really think that's the most important answer to that question in a sense. And I would say that women are not in parliaments and in city halls just to represent women. However, if we don't have women there, There are a number of things that nobody will ever talk about and will never get onto the political agenda. And a few of them have been mentioned here. The structural and shocking levels of violence against women that continue in our societies, including here, including in parliaments. But whether that's coercive control, sexual harassment in the workplace, on the streets, violence online against women, rape, murder of women. These are still very, very pervasive in all of our societies. About half women will experience physical or sexual violence in their lives in Europe. Half. Right, and I'm sorry if that triggered anybody in this room, but that's a reality that would barely even get discussed in our parliaments or city halls if women were not there. Women, which includes women who themselves have experienced violence and survived violence. Another example might be, again, that super soft issue of childcare or rearing infants or giving birth. Like, these are not the soft things at all. These are the hardest things in the world. But women politicians who have small children or give birth while they're in office, who have no maternity leave, raise really important issues about women within the workplace more generally, and access to childcare or ability to breastfeed, for example. These are things which would never get discussed in Parliament if there weren't women there. And I think my experience, certainly those really very difficult issues to resolve around the second place that women have economically in our society. So women are much more likely to be living in poverty, to have precarious jobs, to be paid less. We know already the pay gap, which is the gap between the average hourly earnings of men and the average hourly earnings of women, stays at around 16%. But I want to share another statistic which we don't hear enough, which is the income gap between women and men. The income, I'm talking now about Europe, the income is the amount of money you get, let's say, on your bank account every month. So, and there, the gap between women and men is 40%. 40%, because there's already a pay gap, because women are more likely to work part-time because of care responsibilities, because women are more likely to be unemployed or in, frankly, precarious 0 hours contracts. All these various factors add up to women's income being 40% less than men's income. These are issues that I've seen women politicians at the forefront of trying to resolve. And they are the hard issues, not the soft issues, because they're trying to resolve all of those issues against a system of patriarchy, which reinforces that discrimination and that inequality. And our parliaments and political parties do that. I've seen men also championing that transformation and those transitions for sure. But the women are doing that, and they're paying a price for it because they're going against the system as well. So it matters to have women in parliaments and in city halls and in politics. But we really need to change the whole conversation.
Another question, maybe? Yeah.
Keep going all morning.
Hello, Sam van der Staak of International Idea, colleague of Rumbidzai. I'm here with my 14-year-old niece who's doing a school project. And I want to ask you about how women and youth can actually team up, because they are both large but disadvantaged groups. They face similar challenges, not the same challenges. So is there a role for them to push for certain things together? And if so, how?
Yes, really important. I'll take this one first and then go backwards, and you can. Yeah, is that all right? Yep. So first and foremost, we're not separate either, because youth is also women and girls, right? So we're not two separate kinds of movements, if you like. But I absolutely agree with you. I think both youth and women are disadvantaged and excluded, and have their voices excluded within our traditional systems and structures. And that's why we see such powerful rising up of youth movements and women's movements. And not only, we also see other social groups which are disadvantaged and excluded rising up and organizing anew. And this is what gives me hope at the moment, whether it's powerful voices fighting against racism and fighting for decolonization, youth movements or women's movements, and often intersecting across those movements. And in particular, you see that around fighting climate change and fighting for environmental justice. Young women leading those movements for change, really having powerful voice in mobilizing their peers and wider societies, in shaming our politicians and our existing and companies that perpetuate climate change into making change happen. So I think youth are not like leaders of tomorrow, like leaders of today. I say that from a vantage point of being very middle-aged now, but so I think absolutely joining forces around positive, hopeful future building, about thinking about the societies we want to build together that are more inclusive, more collaborative, more about power sharing, and more caring. Actually, I think we could do brilliantly. And perhaps there's some need for. We've talked a little bit about reinventing the ways in which we debate and discuss and disagree respectfully in order to find solutions. And I think maybe there would be some really interesting work to do in building collaborative conversations across those sometimes different movements. So how do we have intergenerational discussions within the women's movements or within the environmental movements? How do we really create spaces where we're listening to the leadership and the voice of young women in the women's movement, for example, but also learning from the experience of powerful women who've come before us? So, and I think there's a lack of those spaces where we can genuinely listen and learn from one another. And I'm really concerned and do a lot of work in facilitating those kind of conversations and dialogues, and trying to bring us beyond you've got it wrong, you're wrong, to what do we need to get to and how do we start building those things together? So yes, absolutely think there's a lot of work to be done to build that powerful force for change.
Thank you, Joana. First of all, big applause to you. At the age of 14, you are in this room. That's really, really very mature at your age. And I think you will have a very bright future. I really think that we need to install a mindset among the young people that if we don't give you, a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair. It's very important that you have that mentality, that we are not going, in certain spaces, you don't have it easy. You have to create your own space there. You have to create your own opportunity. And that will pave the way for other young people. And what's interesting about this new generation is that they are more aware, they're more sensitive, they're more conscious about so many things that concern our society, our environment. So I have more hope, I would say, than fear about the next generation. But the next generation will have double challenges. So it's very important that you create the path for others and, push into grasping and creating the opportunities for your own self.
Thank you. And thank you, my colleague Sam, for your presence and for being a role model. That's what we need. And I think for me, it's important in terms of being an example of the objective engagement of men and boys in advocating for gender equality and women's empowerment, but not only just advocating, but also for men to understand that they are not only allies, but they are also beneficiaries. When gender equality is attained, it actually benefits men and boys in all their diversity as well. So I acknowledge you for living what we preach in that regard. I totally agree with my co-panelists in terms of the interventions or strategies that need to be put in place, especially to promote experiential learning and sharing and mentoring. We know sometimes it happens in informal ways, and I always say I am from the BBC era, which is born before computers era. So we also face challenges sometimes, somehow I do, in terms of, because of the digital divide. And seeing a lot of young people always wanting to communicate and taking it, everything being about, being IT based, being on gadgets. But I think more and more we need the in-person networking and learning and experiential sharing, because ultimately, like Joan said, and we also say this, Sana, is the issue is always not to see as youth and women being pitted against each other, because it's cross-cutting. Women as a group, we know we are not even a group, because for me group denotes a small number. Women as a segment of the population, 50% or more, just as in that segment of the population we have the youth, who are also not we are not a minority, because we have a youthful population. But what we need to see is a lot of investment in deliberate efforts for experiential learning and sharing. It might be possible to do some of those interventions like online, using the popular social media platforms or digital tools, but there's also maybe need for formal, institutionalized, what I call maybe hand-holding, in order to walk through, to walk together, because the experiences in terms of the levels and the intensity might be different, because the world is constantly changing. But you actually find that the nuances are very similar, because the very same perceptions and attitudes that work against and push back women as a segment of the population to advance, they will be the same that are also used in regard to the youth. That, they are young, they can't be trusted with power, they can't be trusted with leadership, they are not competent, they are inexperienced. Yet we entrust young people to vote at the age of 18, at least in several countries, but we can't entrust the youth to be leaders. At the same time, you see those are some of the similar perceptions also towards women as a segment of the world population, that they can't be trusted, they are not good enough, they are not competent, they don't have experience. And yet we know men tend to be privileged, as we've already said about patriarchy and everything that, it is entrenched because of patriarchy. They've been learning by doing and making even some horrendous mistakes in the process, in the processes that have caused wars and conflicts across the world. And yet the same advantage or even opportunities for women in all their diversity, including young women, to learn, we have not been afforded that. So maybe these are some of the interventions that we really need to advocate for. Like I said, even at the beginning, even the educational curriculum, let it not just be about the intellectual, technical knowledge. How about the social, human development of a person in terms of their ability, in terms of the opportunities that are opened to them? When I grew up in our textbooks, I used to see the illustrations of a doctor, to be very honest, where a male picture, a man with a white coat, and that thing what doctors use, what do they? Yeah, stethoscope. So I grew up with the notion that doctors are male. And those were the illustrations. But now I know it has changed. Like I said, I'm of the BBC era, but I would really want to believe that the legacy that us of the BBC era should leave is to mentor the young women, but not only women, and boys as well, because they have to see that the world can be different if both women, men, and boys, and in all their diversity, are given opportunities. It can actually be different. So in as much as we invest in electoral processes, let's also see how are we investing in the context that in which electoral processes take place, in which political parties operate. Let's invest in that and be able to harness the potential and open opportunities and abilities for both men and women and also boys and girls in their diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are out of time, but it's such an inspiring panel. So thank you so much. And maybe one last question, if there is anyone who, yes, please.
Hello, Sina Avarai from the Baha'i International Community. My reflection and question was around that idea of gender equality in light of understanding the wealth of diversity in general, and also building a bit on what Mrs. Maycock was sharing on the need to redefine some values like power or or collaboration, and in general maybe understanding that there is half of the population in seeing in the wealth of diversity. There is half of the population which has when we understand that there is a need to redefine all these concepts, that when half of the population doesn't have access to sharing their view in this at the same level, it's one of the greatest barrier to actually having prosperity, and also maybe that's the answers to reshaping democracy and reshaping our society in a way that benefits all is can be found in that. Yes, that's on valuing the elements and qualities that are traditionally more associated with women and how it could benefit all. And the question was around how can also men be champions of feminism and understand as well that this matter is something that benefits the whole of society, and that all these conceptions have been lacking and have been a barrier to progress for all.
Thank you so much. Yes. How do we rely men to our cause?
I'm just going to answer the question of how men can champion feminism and can be involved. I think it's very sad that at this stage we are still asking the question, because I think it's the misconception of what is feminism. It's just a branch of humanity. I mean, it's just part of, defending human rights in a collective way. But I think because in society, unfortunately, men and women, we tend more to talk to each other than to communicate with each other. There is so much that men don't know about women, and there is so much women don't know about men. And I think maybe it will be interesting to start to create spaces where we can discuss the taboos around the gender. This is something that we did in 2017. I founded this movement called Women Quick, which comes from Earthquake. The objective is to shake ideas that we have around gender, women, men, and create new perspectives. And we do that by inviting two people with opposed ideas. And we ask them to debate a topic related to gender. We did this movement in Belgium, in Germany, in Azerbaijan, in Sudan, and Lebanon. And every place it was very stimulating, discussing virginity, discussing sexuality, discussing politics, discussing science and biology. And it is always heated discussions, but the speakers find one point in common that they have, and then they start discussion, and then they start communication, and then they start collaboration. And that's, I think, something that is needed in our society on a daily basis, that we confront people with whom we have opposed ideas. We share society with these people. And we are going to have the responsibility to evolve our societies with those people. So we should not be like in comfortable zones only. We should be also involved in very, very uncomfortable, challenging places. And I think then maybe we will make sure that we create this healthy relationship between men and women. I feel like as humans, we have developed on so many different levels, including cuisine. we have, really made sure to kind of, create this very sophisticated, menus and dishes. And somehow we failed to grow our discussion between each other.
Great, thank you. I really agree with what you said, Sana, about the misconception of feminism, and that's why I said right at the beginning, it's not about a battle between men and women, how it's often been portrayed. It's not saying that women are better than men either, but it's saying that men aren't better than women. It's saying that we all have to participate, and we have to recognize the barriers to that participation is also grounded in our gender and our sex. And so what can men do? Men can definitely be feminists. I remember when I was probably first exposed to feminism in the 80s, there was definitely a feeling that men just couldn't be feminists. I think that's evolved somewhat now. There is a need for women to organize themselves, though, because of the ways in which women are excluded and the way that the dominant practices of meetings and dialogue and conversations are still quite patriarchal. But men can definitely be feminist. I think there's much that men can do because of their position of relative power and access to champion the transformations to our politics and our societies that we've talked about here that would benefit men and women, actually, but are sometimes seen as women's issues. I think we'd all benefit from a society that's less violent, less competitive, more collaborative, more sharing. So that's the first thing, perhaps, is just to sort of help redefine and challenge when people misrepresent feminism. And then the second thing is in your own lives to take a long, hard look at the ways in which you might be perpetuating gender stereotypes. So, feminism is very concerned with saying that the personal is political. So, because feminism is not just about stuff out there, it's about our lived experiences as women and men and our diversity as well. So it's always good place to start in the home. Are you sharing the care responsibilities if you have them? Are you sharing responsibilities for social life, for remembering birthdays, for doing the dishes and the cooking? So really have a good hard look at that first. Particularly if you share your house with people of the opposite gender, and do the same in your workplaces. Are you relying on women? Are you stereotyping women into roles of supporting, taking the minutes, organizing the coffee? Are the workplace practices discriminating women who have childcare responsibilities? And are they discriminating men who should have childcare responsibilities but aren't able to access them? So I think you can always start in terms of looking at home, looking in the workplace. From the lofty ideal of changing the whole narrative, it's also important to have somewhere where you can start. And then really important is to call out when you see behavior which is discriminatory, misogynistic, sexist, racist. If you see sexual harassment happening on public transport, which is where I think in France they did a survey that 99% of all women in France had experienced sexual harassment on public transport. So it's a place where a lot of sexual harassment happens. So if you're seeing that happening, to call it out and to confront it. If you're seeing sexism or misogyny happening in the workplace, to find ways to learn about how to call it out in a way that's not confrontational or aggressive. To give up space as well, and give your space to women to have their voices heard. And then to that point, my last thing to say perhaps is listen when women speak and believe them. Often we find that we're not listened to by men particularly, but then we're not believed when we call out what society is really like for us. So be curious, I think, as a man is a really good piece of advice I would give. Did you want to say something? You have a mic? No? No.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this enlightening panel. Thank you for traveling to Brussels and coming to us here. And well, I will be closing this panel now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you to Olivia, who's been moderating her first session. So a big round of applause. She did a great job. Thank you so much to everyone. And we will now have a next session directly without a break. So bear with us for 45 minutes. We will have the next panel and then we will go into a break, if that's okay for you. Thank you so much.
Youth are the future of our democracy.
I'm terrible with. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Camilla Boekvoets. Now, welcome to this panel discussion. A short announcement. Normally, we had more speakers, but one of the speakers, unfortunately, couldn't make it through labor difficulty of his wife. But during the break, because we are a little bit short of time, we can show you his video presentation. So if you want to learn more about youth participation in the Netherlands, you can come back during the break and see his presentation. This panel discussion aims to address similarities, political and democratic participation of young people. We have two speakers with us. Briefly introduction, Nicola Baqueta. He is a scientific associate at Institute of Social Research in Zagreb. He's involved in studying educational and youth policy with a specific focus on civic education. And then we have Domenico Melidoro. He's a lecturer at the Department of Political Science at Lewis University of Rome. He's also a researcher, and his research focuses on contemporary political theory, and he is an author of Dealing with Diversity. I now want to give the floor to our first speaker. Nicola will share in his intervention some insights about improving youth participation through education innovation. May I give you the floor, Nicola?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As said, my name is Nicola, and I come from Zagreb. I work at the Institute for Social Research there, and I will address even some questions that were raised in the panel before, because I'm going to talk about intervention in the education system in Croatia. So we conduct our research regarding youth participation, political literacy, and so on every 4 to 5 years with a different group of youth. We have our research with final year secondary school pupils that we conduct every 4 years. Then we conduct also research in cooperation with Friedrich Hebel Stiftung, and that's the research on the whole youth population from 15 to 30 years. And the things that we know for the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years from this research, that that we have like a lot of young people in Croatia that are not interested in politics. So around 62% of Croatian youth have little or no interest in general political affairs, and only 12% stated that they were interested or very interested. And also, they're not really interested in local politics, in EU politics, only around 10% of our young people. Also, they don't want to participate in political life, and especially in informal politics. Their participation, they tend to engage in voluntary work or certain activities within their schools, but after that, they do not really participate in informal way. They go out on elections, but that's around national average, let's say. It's around 40% of young people who participate in national elections. And so in order to strengthen young people, encourage them to participate in their local communities, and to create like long-term foundations for their participation in later life, we decided to make an intervention and created a curricula called School and Community. And it was introduced in 3 counties in Croatia at the beginning of the school year 2022-2023, and it's piloted now in 59 schools, and it involves around 1,300 young people, so pupils in schools. So the whole idea of this elective subject, there are 11 thematic units that they can address through the course. So culture and media, physical activity and sport, health, democracy and civil society, migrations, urban planning and housing, social equality, generations, economy, environment, personal freedoms and human rights. So all like different topics that they can address. And I think on the first day someone said that that young people, that they don't have enough focus, and that they want like really fast changes in topics, and they want to, you know, they need like fast pace regarding their participation and so on. But we decided to go in completely different direction. So they have to choose one topic, and they're going to deal with this one topic for the whole year, so for the 70 school hours. And so some of the topics that they chose are, for example, perception of hate speech and hate symbols in public space, the problem of deforestation in order to obtain space for the construction of residential areas and other forms of public infrastructure, peer violence, the influence of social networks on mental health of young people, menstrual poverty, mutual connection of island settlements and their connection with the mainland. So all different aspects that we've in different panels that we discussed during these 3 days. We discussed environment, we discussed women's rights and so on. So they already chose different topics that they want to deal with. And great thing about the whole process is that we have vocational schools and also generalistic program schools, so gymnasiums. And the thing is that according to our research, young people from vocational schools, they don't they have lower political knowledge, lower participation, their beliefs are more authoritarian, discriminatory, and so on. So it's really important to work with both group of young people. So the whole idea of this course is it's divided in 4 phases. And the 5th phase is like reflection, and it covers all this whole this process. So the first one is deliberation. So students like they discuss different problems in their communities, and they engage in different methods. For example, community mapping, photo voice, and so on. And they try to present these challenges in the end in front of the whole classroom, and to decide which one they will work on for the rest of the school year. So only one. And during this process, they invite different experts, like from city council, NGOs, university, professional associations, and so on, to get like different perspectives on this problem that they are going to work on. Then they're after this process, when they choose their topic, their problem, they engage in research. So we don't want them to like go for an intervention without getting to know what's the behind the problem, what are the needs maybe of the people around them, and so on. So they conduct research, they construct on their own with their professors and so on, their questionnaires, their protocols for interviews, for focus groups. They're conducting document analysis and so on. So they make this simple analysis of data in order to see what's happening. For example, they're making questionnaires, and they're conducting with, for example, with people in buses if they're engaged in the problem regarding public transport. So they're trying to get different information regarding this problem. And after that, the next phase is gaining experience. So they visit different organizations or institutions where they can acquire experience related to problem solving. So they want to see how the relevant actors address these problems, and to see what they can do and how it's done. And after that, they have intervention. So they have to propose the solution. So it doesn't have to be solution for the work problem, but for the little part of the problem in their own community. So if they are addressing menstrual poverty, and they're discussing this problem in their class, in their community, and so on, but they will address it like through the intervention in their school, and to get the everything that is possible to address this problem and solve it on this level. And they have reflection, so they look back to the conversation, they address the learning process, their experience and the changes in attitudes, how they think about that problem now. And the idea is to learn them how to solve these problems in their community, to see what are the steps that they have to do as citizens to solve different kind of problems. They're working on one problem, but they can learn how to do to solve the problems from different parts of these perspectives. So the whole process is based on mutual cooperation, moderation, cooperation with community and different actors from community. There is a critical reflection during this process, and the whole thing is collaborative, and we foster that they use experiential learning methods. And certain result that we expect is development of knowledge, skills and attitudes, habits and behavior that is necessary for active participation in the community, and also strengthening the sense of personal and social responsibility and connection, and compassion for the problems of their fellow citizens, and to create certain commitment among them to improve the quality of life in their communities. So our approach was really bottom up. We were conducting the whole process of working with teachers for the whole last year, preparing teachers for their work in schools. Even that is not our prime job. Our prime job is research. But 10 of us, we were conducting 10, 15 workshops with teachers and preparing them how they can deal with these old problems and how to let go, to let go to young people to choose the problem and their topic on their own, and not to try to push them in certain direction.
Okay, Nicolai, thank you very much for this interesting intervention about the youth in Croatia. I found it very interesting that you worked with the curricula at school, the school and community. When you were doing that curricula at schools, did you see some changes in the students? And can you explain us what those changes were?
Okay, we are not directly working with students, but every now and then they come to our institute and we talk about with their professors, we talk with students. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were girls from one school, and they are doing this hate speech thing. So they started to talk that they were not aware of certain things, coded messages regarding hate speech in public, 1888 and so on, different messages that are all around. So they are gaining certain knowledge, and they said that they are going to fight this in the streets and address these problems. And I think that a lot of young people in schools, they are detached from everyday politics because they see corruption, they see that their needs and their ideas are not addressed by politicians. So they are not motivated to engage in politics. And now on this really level that it's really close to them in their everyday life, on their way to school, on their I don't know extracurricular curricular activities around the school, they see different things and they want to address them. So we managed to negotiate with the city council to provide certain financial help for each school in order to provide them with certain materials that they need to work on. So they can see that that local government cares, but also they are questioning their work. So it's really interesting situation, and we commented that every local government that introduced this kind of program is really crazy because these young people are going to question them a lot. So they're trying, they're really starting to see that they can make change on a local level.
And did they question them a lot?
Yes, they're questioning, garbage disposal and so on. So, and final event should be like presentation of all their work in front of the city councils. So we have three counties involved. One is city of Zagreb, and it's Croatian capital. And we have the most schools are situated in Zagreb that are in program. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting because even the opposition supports these things. So we'll see how it's going to work.
Do you think that also the level of increase in political participation will increase with this kind of activities?
Well, I think that certainly they will. I mean, when they are engaged in this kind of program and they are doing their intervention, they are already participate in their communities. So even this participation is already, political participation. But of course, there are different kind of. If we are talking about elections, I have my opinions on that, and I think that we should lower the age level to 16 and engage them more in that way. But this informal participation, I think that they're going to, become aware, and they're going to get skills how to participate. So.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for so far. Then we can go to Domenico. And he will share some insight about civic and political participation of young people in Italy. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So as she said, I will share with you some considerations about civic and political participation of young people in my country. And I think that the best way to approach this issue is to locate these thoughts in a certain framework. So I think that the context in which you have to think about political participation of young people is the following one. Firstly, we have in general a low percentage of voters in Italy. In 2022 political elections, we had almost 64% of voters. And as you may know, in Italy, there is a traditional high percentage of voters. For instance, in the period 1948, 1976, we had almost more than 90% of voters. The second feature is the pandemic. So we have to think about the political participation within the context of pandemic, and in Italy, as in different countries, pandemic had a huge negative impact on young people in terms of sociality, but also in terms of gap generation, also in terms of poverty. So the young people in the conditions of poverty in Italy are going up. And the third feature of this contest is the demographic crisis. So as many countries of the West, we have a demographic crisis, and so if there are less young people, it's difficult to discuss about political participation. And still, given this framework, I think that in the last years there are some good, positive elements in the framework. For instance, there are different polls proving that, for instance, there is a higher percentage of non-voters within generations X and Y. But we observe that generation Z vote and participate more than the other generations. Maybe there is some possible explanation on this fact, and it seems that younger people vote and participate more also because they live within a protected environment, they live within family, they are in education, and so also there are different concerns for people. For instance, younger people are concerned more about environment, school, and civil rights, but older people think more about taxes, work, and employment. So these different concerns can also be referred to different levels of participation, different level of involvement in social and political affairs. Also, there is a difference because Generation Z has been socialized in a post-ideological social and political environment. So also I think this has a huge impact, a deep impact on the issue they think more important for their political participation. And so, for instance, there are also some good news, if I may say like that. It seems that according to the some data published by ISTAT, that is the National Institute for Social and Statistical Research, they say that people in the age 14-24 participate more within the political arena. And of course, the topics in which they are interested are environment, civil rights, and things like that. So given this framework, I think that we can try to give an interpretation of this data. And for instance, someone says that this kind of participation is more individualistic. It can be understood in individualistic terms because it seems that in the last 4 decades there is less concern for social issues and then more for individualistic issues, such as in gender rights, gender consideration, and so on. I don't agree with this perspective because, let's say, from a theoretical point of view, I think that there is no contraposition between social and individual rights. So I think that social and individual rights flourish or collapse together. So there is, if you have the right to marry a woman or a man, and then you cannot buy, you cannot pay the rent. So I think it's an empty freedom. So the freedom should be conceived in broad terms related to development of individuality and connection. So I don't agree with this individualistic representation of political participation for young people. And also there is also another theoretical point, because this way of representing political participation is not completely accurate, because as we said in the previous panel, for instance, topics such as feminism and environment cannot be conceived only in individualistic terms. For instance, feminism, especially some radical versions of feminism, are in favor of a radical shift of paradigm. So when we, especially in some radical versions of feminism, there is they propose like a change of the system. So if you contest, if you raise the problems against the patriarchal system and its connection with the economic system, I think that you are not reasoning in individualistic terms. You are proposing a paradigm shift. I don't say that is good or is right. I'm just saying that that's how some part of feminists are working. And then also the environmental issues. Environmental issues, by definition, are collective issues. So if you take seriously the green movements, they are not proposing small changes in the system. They are not saying, but they are proposing like a sustainable world is a different world. in comparison with the one we are living now. So this seems a bad characterization of young participation if we focus only in individualistic perspective. And then a general point, like just a suggestion about how to improve political participation. And I think this suggestion can come from what deliberative democracy is about. If I take a quotation from an important scholar of deliberative democracy, Joshua Cohen, he says that deliberative democracy is a kind of democracy. So the reasoning must, in some way, be the reasoning of the equal persons who are subject to the decisions. So deliberative democracy is about equality, is about inclusion. And sometimes in the public debate, the foundations of deliberative democracy are not explicit. So they say people have to participate, but why do they have to participate? So I think that in deliberative democracy, there is this egalitarian tension, and we have to think about this egalitarian ethos, like we can say. But still, we have to think that deliberative procedures should be, in order to guarantee that deliberative democracy is egalitarian and is inclusive, deliberative procedures should be top-down. Sorry, bottom-up, as you must say, because given that we live in conditions of deep pluralism, we cannot think that we can impose from outside a certain model of deliberation, a certain model of conceiving relations, civic relations, and so on. So the sensitivity to the context and to the different culture and values should be one of the first topic addressed in deliberative democracy. And then the final point is related to the broadness of the civic sphere. And sometimes, especially, I don't know, maybe also in other countries, we have some problems of self-censorship. You know, you don't think to be free to express what you think, because there is politically correctness, because there is war. So the justification of deliberative democracy is that some of justification concern the fact that in giving arguments in public terms, you improve the discussion. So what happens if I feel some self-censorship? The public debate becomes poor, and we don't have the core elements in order to have a good and free and equal discussion. So that's.
Thank you, Domenico, for this intervention about young people and their participation in Italy. I'm also glad to hear that the Generation Z does better than the previous one in participation. But do they also get more involved in political activities or civic activities?
It depends on what you mean by political activity, because one of the explanation for the low level of political participation in election is due to the fact that people don't trust political parties. So all this political participation takes place outside political parties. For instance, there is Comunità di Sant'Egidio, maybe you know, because they have also international activities. So the people who work for Comunità di Sant'Egidio and organizations like that don't feel to be involved in parties. Sometimes I speak with the political leaders, and they say that the problem is that they don't have young people. If you see, for instance, the numbers of people joining political organization, you feel, I don't want to say, for instance, about Democratic Party, before the National Congress that was celebrated in February. They did a poll about the priorities of the party, and maybe the 70% of people participating to this online vote were over 50. So they have political parties in Italy, as I think everywhere, they have difficulties in involving people, and still there is a lively political environment. For instance, in Italy there was a huge participation in Fridays for Future and things like that.
Okay.
So there is participation, but not within the
Not in-
parties.
Okay. And sometimes politics is hard to follow for adults, let alone for youngsters. Do you think that we have to do something with the language that we use in addressing it to youngsters, but maybe also in general?
Yes, because the language you use, the instruments, new technologies that you use can be very important to address the lack of participation. And still, I think there is something that they are doing in terms of using new technologies. But I think it's not enough, because if you perceive that politics is something different from what you do, and for what are your main aims, is not enough. So I think that also participation regarding some specific topics should be the aim of parties and institutions.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you both for so far. I think, Ludmila, do we have time for some questions? Yeah? Okay. I heard we have 10 minutes for questions in the audience. I see also a lot of young people, and I will address a question later to you, but I will give the floor now to all the participants who have questions. Do you have questions? Can somebody at the back?
Back. Okay.
I just wanted to comment on the last thing that was said. I don't agree that we should make politics simpler. I think that we should just make education a little bit better, because I don't think young people don't have the ability to grasp, I mean, normal things. Thank you.
Would you like to? A question? Okay. Here.
Hello, everybody. My question is how social media affects the decision making of young people in elections, and how you protect your young people from external forces. It doesn't matter, both of them.
Thank you.
So I don't think that the problem is to make politics simple. The problem is that there is no universal language from an external perspective that you can use everywhere and propose this language and this way of thematizing the issues in an impartial way. So as I said, also the deliberation should be sensitive to differences, and to be sensitive to young people is another way to be sensitive to difference. And this does not mean to make simple, but if I perceive that, for instance, also related to gender issues, if I perceive that the politics is for people, white men, 50 years old, heterosexual, so I'm not involved in this kind of discussion. So if politics becomes an arena in which different people can converge from different perspectives, I'm convinced to participate, and I can bring my perspective within this field. So it's not a way to make simple. It's I think a way to make the political discourse more sensitive to differences, and age difference is another. The previous speaker was talking about intersectionality. Also, age is a dimension of diversity of people, a temporary dimension, because you are not for always young, unfortunately.
Just before the answer, can you just explain external forces?
You know, for example, the part of Elon Musk, yeah, in Twitter. The day will come when this kind of people, not, I'm not saying that Elon Musk is bad, but he's a really good influencer, and he can influence for the young people who really believe the future. And how, I mean, how, how can I say, what kind of impact social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, is affecting to the vote, and if, for example, the war in Russia and Ukraine shows us that social media is really very effective, and so I want to know.
Okay. So according to research that we have with students of final year of secondary schools, they use social media as one of the primary sources for their information regarding politics. However, they don't really trust these media, so they have certain distance to the information that they get from the social media. I don't think that they are more sensitive than the rest of the population, as we've seen in U.S. elections in 2016. That social networks, especially Facebook, were really used to, and I think it's much easier to do that in majority electoral systems. When you need to swamp just in areas that are really close, like between two parties, and you need to swamp like 2 or 3%. It's much easier to use social networks for targeting of voters than in systems like in Croatia, where you have a lot of parties, and it's not majority voting system and so on. So of course social networks are important, as newspapers or television were important in I don't know, 80s. But I think that we can address this through the education, through fact checking, and introducing young people to recognize false information. On the other hand, you cannot protect people from everything, and they are usually in their echo chambers. So a lot of young people, when they're in their echo chambers and they're just conversing with their friends and people who think in the same way, it's really hard to reach these young people and to get them out of their bubbles. So I think that the EU will have to, and nation states will have to really carefully legislate these things regarding social network, and EU is doing that. So I think that we can combat this thing, but also it's not we should not go in the direction of censorship and so on.
Maybe a last question?
Last question.
Yes?
Thank you. I'm Teresa from the Bavarian Youth Council in Germany. Thank you for all the data you presented. I think that's very interesting. So I'm looking at the title of your panel discussion. Do you see any similarities or differences between your countries? And do you also think that we can use your data to so to say, transfer it to the European level and see if participation on the European level can be improved or and strengthened. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think that there are similarities, especially I'm not a social researcher, I'm a political theorist, so I work very badly with data. But I think that there are some similarities because the context in which we work is more or less the same in Western countries, in European countries. So there are similarities. For instance, the environment as a topic very familiar to young people is by definition a global issue. So I think that maybe different traditions in Europe imply that there are differences in participation. For instance, in Italy, environment came late in comparison with other northern countries. But still, now there is a communication among young people. So I think there are some similarities, internet and so on. So people, the environmental movements are global movements. So I think with specific particularities, because we have to think about specificities, particular context, but still, I think that we live in the same. The attempt should be to not to globalize, but to act in agreement with different, starting from different perspective and context.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when we are doing our research, for example, Friedrich Ebert, with cooperation with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, we usually have like 10 countries involved in our research, and it's usually former Yugoslavia countries, plus, for example, Bulgaria, Romania, so on. So in this case, you have like 4 or 5 EU countries and 4 and 5 countries that are not in EU, but they have like their paths towards the EU. And results are really similar in this case. And I think that these things that I was talking about, like this bottom-up approach, that if we are working on that, and then we have different EU programs like Erasmus and so on, next year we have European elections. So if we are working on their engagement on a local level and preparing them for participation, I think that they will, reach this next stage and to start to participate on the European elections, getting interested in the topics on the EU level and so on. But we have to be, realistic that not all people are going to care about the politics all the time. Some people, they don't just want to participate. They are interested in their own lives. They think that politics cannot influence them. They have their jobs, their families, and so on. So I think it's really illusionary to expect that everyone is going to participate. I think that in the previous panel was it's not just about giving everyone the same opportunity, but to engage them on the same level. But some people, they don't want to participate. They really don't care about these things. But it is important to provide, information, skills, and so on. So when they have some problems in their communities, on their local level, that they know how to solve that, how to bring that to the national level, to EU level, and so on. Maybe they will not go on the EU elections, all of them. Maybe it's going to be 60%. But then for the next 5 years, they will know how to, work on that and to improve their communities.
Maybe a last question.
Last question.
If not, I really have one.
Yeah.
No? I'm willing to give it up, but yeah, okay. So I was really wondering about the cultural differences. Is there in any way, so do cultural factors affect the way we engage in political life, not only in classical way, but also the new ways of participation among young people? And if you see that maybe on your own level in Croatia and in Italy, in which way do you see that? Thank you.
Okay, in Croatia, so Croatia is ex-socialist country. It was part of Yugoslavia, and certainly the past is really important. So after the breakup of Yugoslavia, people were expecting that democracy and capitalism will solve a lot of problems. And after that didn't happen, they became really skeptical towards democracy, toward political parties, and we have a pretty low level of trust in institutions, in government, political parties, politicians, and so on. And this level is really, really low. And we were trying to explain it through different sets of variables, but we were not able to do that. So the thing is that this disappointment is really important for their relations towards democracy and towards institutions. And when they see that democracy doesn't work as they expected, they became really they're pushing away the institutions and so on. The interesting thing is that you were talking about that young people are not participating in political parties. We have like one part of young people, I mean, a lot of them doesn't trust to political parties, but more of that, they're part, a larger percentage is a member of political parties, not because they believe in political parties, but because they expect something from political parties. They expect job, they expect some benefits, and so on. So they're ready to become members of political parties, even though they don't trust them. So that's the one way in which this historical, cultural, development influenced young people in Croatia.
I think that in Italy, the situation, Italy is a plural country if you consider but you have to think about that is not an old country of immigration. So the cultural difference matter up to a certain point, also because we have a very restrictive law about citizenship, and so you cannot pluralize political sphere if many young people are not Italian citizen, even if they live there. So they are not, they don't have reason to participate. So also because that's the reason why, for instance, if you see data, you will find that among new generations of Italians, let's say, there is a low percentage of participation. So cultural difference cannot emerge within the political sphere because the law of citizenship is very restrictive. So this makes the political discussion less plural in any sense.
Just wanted to add one thing regarding context. So I don't know how many of you are like familiar with Croatia and Croatian context, but in Croatia we have like 90% of Catholics and 99% of people are white collar. So we don't, young people maybe are not aware of different things of maybe racism and so on, because they don't have that. I mean, we have now access regarding racism and so on. So our young people who are, let's say, far right or fascists or however you want to call them, they we have like minorities like Roma or Serbs, because we have we had the war in 90s and so on. So we have different direction towards which this racism, fascism, and so on is oriented. But and we have a lot of now foreign workers in like Volt and so on, and now we see that our young people, they have this racist or one part of young people have this racist foundation or thinking and so on. So we have certain problems that we are not still aware of. So we need to work on them now in order to prevent that in the future. Yeah.
Then we are going to close. this panel discussion. Nicola, thank you very much. Domenico, thank you very much. Also the audience member, thank you very much. And for the ones who want to learn more about youth participation in the Netherlands, we will show a video of our speaker who couldn't make it today. So then you can see what's happening over there. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you again. We will now have a break, a coffee break. We are waiting for you back here at
So I wonder, yeah, since the European Commission is busy about that, maybe how can it be done in a more top-down approach? Like how can it be done in, I mean, like changing mindsets of executive branches of lower levels, and maybe also European level. Yeah, I realize it's not a very clear formulated question, but that's it.
Thank you. So we have a second question.
Thank you. I am Adriana Buchiu, and I work in the European Parliament in the Democracy Support Directorate. And I would like, first of all, to congratulate you on the work for the Conference on the Future of Europe. I personally follow it closely as an inspiration for our work in the European Parliament. We have recently facilitated a Citizens' Assembly in Montenegro, and we are currently engaging with a Citizens' Assembly in Kosovo. So I'll have two questions that are methodological. Now, the first question is concerning the follow-up and the link with the citizens that were engaged and active during the conference. How do you maintain the dialogue with them, and how do you inform them on the follow-up? Basically, from what we see in such a process, there is a risk of backfire, and instead of creating trust, if citizens are not informed on the developments, there might be some mistrust in the institutions. Basically, they might be disappointed that the recommendations are not actually implemented. And the second question is concerning the citizens panels, or also the Conference on the Future of Europe, the way it was organized. Are you exposing the citizens, like for example, in the citizens panel on food waste? Are you exposing them to some background information, or are you fully relying on what was called yesterday the wisdom of the crowd? And when you organize such a citizens panel, how do you exactly proceed? Thank you.
Do we take another question? Is there any? Or do we start answering? No, so let's.
All right, thank you very much for these questions. So on actually listening, this is really key. This is really key, and I think it links also to a little bit to the other question that followed on. So there are two elements, I would say. There's the element of really actually listening, and then there's the element of communicating or giving feedback back to the citizens so that they see that we have listened to them. And I think the Conference on the Future of Europe was a really a super interesting let's say laboratory in which we had the opportunity to see how both of these processes are going on in parallel. And we as witnesses to this, with the key political decision makers, can really attest to the fact that there has been a number of times this aha moment from the high level politicians who realized, oh, if we get 800 randomly selected people together, we give them a space to deliberate and talk about issues, they will come with really meaningful recommendations. They will come with recommendations that are truly in line with what we ourselves were thinking. And it's not a coincidence that in 2023, Commission Work Program is 80% based on the recommendations of the citizens. It means that the thinking was very similar. So the more we run participatory and deliberative processes, the more such aha moments we will create, and the more understanding there will be that, in fact, there is, from the political decision makers, that there's nothing to fear. You can only bring and get value from including citizens because they may have a perspective that is slightly different to yours. So that is the first thing. The only thing that we can do is repeat it more and more. And we're trying to, as the Commission, to promote it. We're trying to promote it to national levels. We're trying to promote it to local levels. and to support whoever is doing that. On the question of then linking that to risks and challenges that result from this. Maybe Ingrid can say something on the follow-up, but I'll say just a word on that. The risk is, of course, once you engage people, that they will feel, okay, I've invested my time, effort, I've given my my thoughts, my energy into this, and now this is being diluted. On one hand, you could say that this is something that politicians experience throughout their lives, because they need to find a compromise. Frequently, they are overruled by other majority. So this is an experience that is interesting in that sense for people when they get engaged in democratic processes. There are a number of considerations that are to be taken into account. And I'll answer the last question, and then I'll let you talk about the follow-up. But the last question on citizens panels, are we exposing them to background information? Yes. It's important that citizens are informed about the topic. We are certainly informing them that they will be participating in such a panel. They are invited to do their own research on this, but we also provide them with a very concrete packet of information, and we provide them with an expert panel of neutral people who are presenting different perspectives on the topic, and then they step out, and it's the citizens who need to deliberate based on this background information and picture that has been presented. And maybe just one more word on that is that we understand, just like democracy, this is a work in progress process. We are continuously learning. This year, we're running 3 first panels. We will continue to do it next year. We will learn and we will apply the knowledge that we have learned. We have done this also from the conference, and we will continue to do that as we go along.
Yes, thank you very much, Tama. Just to kind of build on that a little bit, if you have time to look at the Vice President's speeches on her website, so you will see that from the very beginning, when she was engaging on this process, she referred directly to the feedback mechanism. This was a key point for her, because she believes that not having a robust feedback mechanism in place, not having it designed already in the initial stages of the process, so that citizens know what they can expect, and rather than raising their expectations and disappointing them, that we actually show them from the beginning how their contributions are going to feed into the whole process. So this is an important part of most deliberative processes, and was certainly important for the Vice President in her role as a European Commission co-chair in the whole process. When it comes to executive and political buy-in, I mean, the conference itself was underpinned by a joint declaration. This was signed by the 3 presidents of each of the institutions. And so from the very beginning, we had this political buy-in, and the feedback mechanism was involved there. In a very brief sense, let me say that the feedback mechanism started directly after the 9th of May, when in Strasbourg the citizens presented their proposals to the 3 presidents in an official ceremony in the European Parliament. This was followed up then by the European Commission with a communication putting a vision into concrete action, where the Commission outlined in a very clear way how it was going to follow up to the various proposals received from the conference. This then was followed up by a feedback event then that we had in December, I think it was the 10th of December, if I remember correctly, 12th, where we had an event specifically with the 800 citizens from the Conference on the Future of Europe, where we explained in detail with them the response that we were giving to the various proposals. The most concrete piece of, let's say, documentation that we could offer them from this was, as Tom already mentioned, the 2023 European Commission Work Programme, where we said that practically 80% of the initiatives respond to these
So it's really a vital part of the process, and in many ways, it helps to build legitimacy around the whole process itself, and underscores the political commitment to this. And I think it is, as one of the people raised there, it is really important that the political buy-in is there from the beginning. Otherwise, I think we would do more damage to democracy than if we did nothing at all. And I know that the Vice President is very firm on that point. Yes, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments, questions?
We have 5 minutes left, so maybe a final question. If not, I will also have one. So, no one? No? Maybe if you allow me. I was wondering, deliberative democracy as a process per se, aside from the recommendation that we receive from citizens, I think it's really vital to multiply this, especially on local level. And I want your opinion on that, because when people exercise this, when they are exposed to information, when they see how the process works, they also see that it's not an excuse when we say it takes time to do something. So I think it's really vital, not only for the follow-up, but also is a way of learning, of educating citizens. And I'm not meaning that in a condescending way, but it's just a way to actually get into how it is, how the process goes. So what is your take on that? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that question. Perhaps we should have already mentioned that one of our key partners in the whole process on the Conference on the Future of Europe has been the European Committee of the Regions. They are a key partner actually in all our policy making in the European Commission, and actually the Vice President is there this afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. That's right. So they were an incredibly valuable partner actually during the conference. If you go on to the multilingual digital platform that accompanied the whole conference process, you will see the high number of events that they actually organized at the local level. And this is key because there is this pressure that needs to come and be convinced at the top level, let's say at the executive level, like we already said. But actually, politics really and democracy really starts at the local level, at the grassroots. And as a former mayor herself, the Vice President is very, very sensitive to this. So she was very keen to ensure that local and regional authorities felt supported and were able to engage in the process. And actually, if we look across the European Union, actually even in this member state where we are now, we can see that the local deliberative processes that have taken place here have certainly helped to inspire the Conference on the Future of Europe. They're very important processes, and they have managed to embed them very effectively in Belgium, for example. This, of course, does link very keenly into the topic of education and learning, but maybe I'll hand over to Tama because I know that you like to.
Well, first, I want to go back to what I hinted at before when I said that, participants in the conference, in a way, had become almost like politicians, or had the experience of the politicians, where they also felt this frustration of their point of view not always being fully taken into account, fully implemented. But it was also a common experience. It was a very much of a common experience of all of the different participants to understand that while it is true for me, it's also true for you. So as I said also earlier, the more such exercises we can have, the more situations we create for people to appreciate the complexity and the importance of dialogue and finding a common ground, which isn't easy, which takes time, which is can be frustrating if particularly on those topics on which we really have a very passionate point of view. So wherever we can create such settings, we should do it. With the conference, we try to do something on the multi-language digital platform, where we opened it up for what we called living room debates, basically where you could, in the design of the deliberative process, we said all of those who want to share their perspectives can come together, as long as they are adhering to the rights, to the rules that are in the charter of the conference. They can come together and they can deliberate amongst themselves, discuss, exchange views, and then create a report, publish it on the platform of the digital platform of the conference, and come back and do it. Now, as I mentioned in the speech, we are also creating this space for the future. So this element of the multi-language digital platform that existed for the conference will now come back. It's taking a little bit of time because IT takes time, it seems, but it's coming back in the sense, and it will allow people to really come together and have lived through this experience of exchanging, which will really bring the benefit that we have. There are other really nice examples of what we have seen that we can talk about later, about how dialogue sometimes of people of exactly the opposite points of view can create value and bring a lot of things out that result in a better common solution. But the more we can have such exercises, the better, and we are trying to enable them and facilitate them, including through the new digital platform that's coming up.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for enabling citizens to make informed decisions, and as well for opening the space for participation of citizens in decision making on European level. We found it very important for all generations and as well for youth. And we are very grateful for having you here. So thank you once again, and see you on break.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for us as well.
Thank you once again. We hope to see you in our next edition of Deliberative Democracy. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to welcome you here. We will now have the closing speech, and we have another guest from the institutions, from the European Parliament, from our co-hosting team. I will invite here for the closing speech Christina Altias, right? Altias. So I'm sorry. Thank you. You have the floor. I think you wanted to have a presentation as well. Okay.
Yes, hello. I am, as you just heard, Christina. I'm not sure. Am I supposed to sit? Probably. 1 second. So very, very nice meeting you here. I'm Christina Altides, as you just heard. I'm German-Greek, working in the parliament since quite a while now, since 2008. But I recently joined a newly created entity in the GCOM, in the communication area of parliament, that is to coordinate the election campaign for 2024. And I'm fully aware that you have, I'm kind of the last 15 minutes of a 3-day program. So I'm a little bit in awe in front of that, because I'm like, okay, how can I close this? Especially, unfortunately, not having been part of it, because I went through your program and I thought, this is really interesting. If I tell you that before joining the election team, I was working in the youth outreach unit, working with how to engage young people from the parliament side, you can imagine that what you had in your program was really, really interesting for me. But I'm going to give you a little look ahead, let's say, a little heads up what's coming for elections. we are, yes, I mean, it's 2023 now, not even May, not even a year before elections, but it's definitely coming. And I can tell you that the purpose of the election strategy will mainly be, or is twofold, is one, inform, obviously, as many people as possible about what there is to vote about, why it's important to vote, what Parliament is actually deciding, what does it have decisive powers on, so which makes it relevant to vote, if you want. So the information part, and also how to vote. It's also a question of, okay, are there different registration deadlines? Are there registrations or not per country? In a number of countries, 5 countries, we have now 2024, even 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote. That not only in, that's going to be the case for Estonia, for Austria, Germany, Greece, Malta. So that's also going to be something new, and to see how we can inform also the younger audiences about it. And the second purpose, obviously, is the engage. Or perhaps it's not so obvious, because we did it the first time last time, 2019, where the campaign of the last, or the motto of the last election campaign was, this time I'm voting. And it was the first time where the institution, the Parliament as an institution, said, okay, perhaps it should not be the institution Parliament telling people to go and vote, but perhaps it's much more strong if people like you and me, but in our personal functions, in our private functions, try to convince the people that surround us, our friends, our families, the people we know from work, rather than an institution telling you what to do. And so we rallied back then. We opened for the first time this kind of idea of creating a community of people who wanted to support the election campaign, all ages. It was especially youngsters, I can say, but it's not only young people. It was also, actually, then we go to the other end of the spectrum, the elderly people, probably those people who have more time available, if you want, but who then joined this together.eu platform. You heard about, no, back then it was not Together, but you heard about together.eu this morning, I heard, so I don't need to go into details. But this is the engagement side of it. So we really want to base the campaign this year again on not just the institution informing and telling things, but actually EU citizens getting active about it as well, and doing, if you want, their bit of promoting the value to vote. It's not about promoting the EU, really, and that's important for us to keep in mind, because many of us probably are quite, you know, the EU is a good thing, but it's not so much about being an EU, if you want, enthusiast, and it's only speaking to EU enthusiasts. You can vote even if you don't agree with what is decided in the plenary. If you are, let's say, of the position of the ones who lost the vote, if you want, in plenary, it's as important to vote, because you want to be represented stronger, perhaps, in the next parliament, so that your votes or your opinions might be perhaps winning the next time. So so inform and engage, and the messaging will be 2023, mainly around what is Parliament, what has Parliament delivered, this, especially the last legislative period. What have they decided on? And you will see, for example, if you're based in Brussels and you come by the Esplanade in April, you will see that we will have put, let's say, new panels on this skywalk, where we are picking out 8 different legislative files that Parliament, big ones that Parliament has voted on in the past 2.5-3 years, and showing basically people, okay, what is being discussed and decided here, and again to show that it's relevant, it matters, and it matters not if I'm a bit nasty, not just for countries like Qatar and Morocco to bribe certain people in order to make things happen, but it matters for every one of us. Those decisions are affecting our lives, and that's why it's worth it voting. Okay, so this is a bit the delivery, if you want, messaging that we are asking also our partners. We will be asking our ground gamers, our partner organizations, to think, okay, what has been amongst the decisions in Parliament in the last 3 years that is interesting for them or that is relevant for them, and to show, okay, this is why it matters to go and vote. And then from 2024, so next year, this narrative will change a little bit into democracy, so where it's really about voting and what's the power behind voting and why we shouldn't throw away our, let's say, this power. We can see more and more regimes where voting is more of a show and it's not relevant. And do we really want to go there? Or do we really want to give up this freedom that we have of going and voting? So this is a little bit the narrative that will enter in 2024. And then by April, I would say, 24, so the last, let's say, 2 months before the elections, there will be a campaign, a go to vote campaign, that will really then rally everyone to either go and vote or to convince their friends to go and vote, and to help basically to get out the vote, if you want. So like this, you also have a very broad timeline. I know it's not too concrete yet, but even the election date is not clear yet. So it's difficult to give you more. Also, what is not clear yet is whether there will be this kind of Spitzenkandidaten process that we had in the last 2 campaigns, whether the parliament, basically whether the political groups will nominate one candidate that, if that political group gets most votes, will get then commission president. 2014, it worked out. 2019, it did not work out. So that's, I think, also why they haven't made up their minds yet, whether they're going to go for the same thing this time for the 2024 elections. But that's a political thing, decision to take. That's not the parliament administration. In a way, you can see us a bit as the ones inviting people to come to the theater play, the ones giving the stage, the ones putting on the lights, the ones doing the tickets. Okay, here you can find the tickets and so on. And then it's the political groups and the MEPs who are running for elections who will do the play, of course. So that's always a little bit also a difficulty that we have as an institution, not to get into the topics in a way of taking sides. But of course, again, this is also a nice side of the engagement that organizations that join us, like yours, or also individuals like Together.eu volunteers, they can have their own agenda, they can have their own opinion, so they can also fill this with content when we cannot sometimes as an administration. So I think I've almost said everything I wanted to tell you. Just a few, perhaps, on the strategy pillars. Some of it I already mentioned. So how are you going to structure this campaign? Support to MEPs is very important. Media relations obviously is also very important, because that's the, let's say, the mass communication where we really can reach out to most people, especially when it comes to informing. Multipliers is super important for this campaign. We have all sorts of multipliers. I mean, organizations is part of it, private organizations, influencers, celebrities. We want to get on board visitors. Why not? They're coming in hundreds and thousands per year. Why not? They have visited the parliament. They had the first influence. Why not reach out to them and ask them to help us with spreading the word? The Together.eu that you know about, other institutions, and even our own EP staff could function as a multiplier in private, let's say, in their private surroundings. So this is a little bit the 5 pillars. And And yeah, from next year on, as I said, this year there's a lot of preparation being done, building, expanding the networks, providing you with tools that you might need in order to perhaps support us with election campaign, building up websites where we will inform about elections, where we will inform about later the election results, building up also trainings, for example, that we want to offer on together.eu, how to campaign, how to do public speaking, how to convince people to vote. Different things are in the making this year, and then next year it will get much more concrete. And by the time the advertisement campaign assets are ready, then we will also go out with, let's say, those visuals and largely. I don't know if you remember 2019, it started 6 months in advance or even longer in advance, this kind of campaign, advertisement campaign, and they noticed that actually the attention for this only starts in February of the year of the elections. So this is why this year we are going to reduce it, and then like this, it doesn't get worn off, but is hopefully more powerful. And I mean, last time, for the first time in a long time, we managed to increase. Well, if it was us, I don't know actually, but the election, the voting turnout finally increased and stopped the trend of getting less and less. So we hope that we can contribute once more our part to doing like this, in 2024 again, hopefully with the help of a lot of multipliers. But this is to be seen, and obviously is not only a matter of what Parliament as an institution communicates, but also political situation, wars or not wars, national elections in different countries or not. But okay, this is going to be seen. So if you have any questions, this is what I wanted to tell you, let's say in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you for showing us the plans for this ambitious campaign. I come from Croatia, a small member state, where we have 11, I think, members of the European Parliament. And one of the arguments people who don't vote or don't consider it important put forward, it's this number in the total of 700. So my question would be, how would you motivate the voters in smaller member states who have such ways of seeing things?
It's a very valid question, let's say, of the those who put this question, and my answer would be actually okay. There are two. One answer is if not the right Croatian members are in the round, they will not. They will not make it possible to bring across to the other members certain needs that would be there in Croatia as well. Even if you are in a small member states in the European Parliament, the decisions are not taken by country, and then all the I don't know 90 members from Germany are voting one position, and all the French MEPs are voting one position, and then a small group of 11 Croatians don't have a say. They are already split in political groups, and in these political groups, certain decisions also need to be taken sometimes for the political group to be functioning unanimously or in a very harmonic way. They need to function and to vote together in many, well, they're asked to vote together. And that's when even the small ones have a very good leverage to say, okay, but I will only agree on this one if I can put my let's say my concern here, and you take it on board as well. So it's always a question of negotiation, but because it's not a matter of nationality but rather of political grouping, and then the political groups have an interest in appearing unified and not 1/3 of the political group thinks this and the other third votes a different position. That's where the influence of even small member states or members from small member states comes into place, because they do have that. And if it's the right people, they will start networking, they will start talking to everyone, and suddenly the Croatian, let's say, possible Croatian concerns might be everywhere, or might have made it to be put on the forefront everywhere. So this would be my main answer.
Thank you. Can we take a last question?
Of course.
Yes. So okay, here.
Hello, I'm Sylvester from Croatia as well. And I'm coming from grassroots youth organization. And I would like to hear what's your take on or plan for providing youth-friendly information to reach out the unreachable, the rural youth.
To reach out the unreachable, I think we have been working on this in the youth outreach unit for a very long time, and it's probably the hardest question. I think, let's say, putting on my youth outreach hat, our conclusion was that it's very difficult for us to reach them. We really need the cooperation of youth organizations on the ground that are perhaps able to reach them, or better able to reach them, or to speak to them in a language that we don't speak. And I'm not just talking about Croatian, I'm talking about the way you need to talk to people. And then what is also true is that in many countries, in some countries, the rural youth is very organized, and then you can reach them through organizations. But in other countries, I'm thinking now of my second home country, Greece, we are not so into organizations, or at least that was my experience when I grew up in Greece. Whereas in Germany, youth organizations is something very common to be part of in all sectors. And so what do you do how do you reach those that you cannot reach through organizations or like this? So there, the main answer would be the main way to go out, because social media is one thing. So we have a social media strategy, and we're trying to reach them through. The second pillar, I would say, is schools, through schools, because that's where you reach everyone. There will be, of course, a couple of school dropouts, but let's say the safest bet to go out and reach everyone, no matter what financial background or internet access, or I don't know what you have, is the school. And there a lot is being done. For example, if you have heard of the EPAS program of the Parliament, that's a European Ambassador School program, where they try to find schools, not just in the capitals and in the big cities, but also in rural areas, or also vocational schools, not just higher education schools, but also vocational schools, to get a little bit the less usual suspects, as we call them, and to reach out to them. This would be kind of in a nutshell what I would see: social media, schools, and then cooperation with youth organizations on the ground.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And also I want to thank you in particular because the European Parliament Civil Society Outreach Unit was our co-host for the event. So they were so kind to give us the space along with Info Hub and to co-host us. So thank you so much for this 3 days, for this wonderful collaboration. We really worked very well together. I think at least from our side, we had a very nice impression and a really nice experience. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for all of you that attended this 3 days. Maybe just a few practical things before we leave. If you would be available and willing to, please, we really want to know your opinion on this so we can improve it for next time. We have a survey here on the back of your badges. So please make sure to just scan the QR code and then try to answer to the question. Is just 3 minutes. Also, we will make sure that we will send to all of you that registered and were here, we will send you a certificate of attendance for this 3-day event. I think especially it's nice for young people, but also for everyone that want to have this. So we will make sure that in the following days we will get back to you this maybe next week. So we are still a bit with the event, but we will surely do that as well. Thank you so much again, and I hope to see you in the next edition. Thank you so much.